Halo? Laitetaan levy pyörimään. Vals triste.
Niet pony mai.
Jeesuksen Kristuksen perä.
Ai Suomi, katso sinun päiväs koittaa. Yön uhkaa karkoitettu on jo pois. Are you gonna stop me already?
Well, gosh darn it if we ain't, coming out of the bushwork just in time for Finnish Independence Day, which means that there's just one and only film to talk about in today's episode.
Which is Tuntematon sotilas.
Again. And so it will also be the next year if we ever reach the next Independence Day. So, enjoy. This is the authentic Finnish experience.
Yeah, so 1 year ago, we did the original film adaptation from 1955 by Edwin Laine. Analyzed that one, and now we are here in the next installation 30 years later. 1985 is the year. I don't know, it's let's see what we can find from this edition. There is also the one from 2017, which was released in conjunction with the 2017 100th Independence Day of Finland.
So that will be the next year's Independence Day episode, just you all know.
Most likely.
Already.
And I think this would suit our purposes, since we're going to change the format a little bit, which we can talk about at the end of the episode again. But we could do the 2017 actual film version, then talk about the shortened version for the Swedish market and the TV series.
Yeah. Perhaps, even though that would be like a hell of a ton of watching The Unknown Soldier once again. But to all the international listeners, yeah, this truly is the Finnish independence. It's nothing else except, reminiscing the age-old war and watching The Unknown Soldier and talking about it until everybody's ears bleed.
Well, missä tarvit oikein hyvää podcastia. Siellä on sellainen. What's your history with this film, Henrik?
Not that deep, unfortunately. I've seen the Mulberry version perhaps 2 times before, if I remember correctly. Usually, this is kind of how it goes in Finland. We have the original Edwin Laine version, which everybody agrees is like the best film ever done and greatest Finnish film ever made, and the only Finnish film ever should be made, and the only Finnish film that has to be remade every 30 years, etc. It's like an all-consuming shadow that you just can't escape from. And then you have the Mulberry version, and nobody talks about it.
Yeah, that is kind of the case, that it hasn't been as loved by the Finnish audiences as the so-called original. My experience with this Molle version is that I've probably seen it the first time in the late 90s. I think it was me who recorded it on TV to VHS. And there was this promise from my father that this is gonna be an epic film, so we should record it. And I'm pretty sure that I fell asleep when I was watching it for the first time, as it was airing so late as they always do. But I do remember this realistic and serious tone, and that it was kind of fascinating, but also incredibly slow for an early teenager to watch. Why does this film exist?
Well, that's a good question. Really, why does 85 film exist? Perhaps the easiest answer is that the writer of the book, Väinö, as far as I've understood, never really embraced Edwin Liner's version or filmatization of his work, whereas Mulberry was a close friend of Linna and wanted to remake the book kind of in a way how Linna meant it, and I also wanted to take Linna into the whole filmmaking process, as Linna was at least in some capacity involved in making of the 85 version. So I guess this is some type of course correction from Edwin Liner's film, or that's at least the intent here.
Yeah, this was long-awaited reimagining of the Linna novel for new generation, or that's how it was marketed anyway. But there was this conscious need to make it different this time around. And whereas Linna's novel and Linus' original film, they had some humor here, Molle's version has much less of it. Although it's not on any level without humor, but Molle wanted to emphasize the futility and the horrors of war pretty clearly. Perhaps Molle's film also is tonally in line with the general 80s trend in also Hollywood blockbusters, where the film started to get more realistic and darker. But it's it's kind of like this film has started to garner more appreciation only nowadays. At least that's my feeling, which may not account to much, but we've come to accept that the de-romanticizing of our wars is okay, and even I'd say it's preferable.
Yeah, there is like there's a long history with Malberg's 85 version, which is that absolutely nobody likes it, and it's almost being vilified by the Finnish audiences. It's not played yearly in Finnish TV, unlike Edwin Liner's version, which is tradition nowadays. Every Finnish Independence Day, you see Edwin Liner's Unknown Soldier. And whenever the 1985 film is talked about, it usually is that Malberg fucked it up and the film doesn't work and this is bad and that is bad and it's a bad film and why was it made, and oh my god, Edwin Liner's take is such of a masterpiece. And yeah, like already covered, Edwin Liner's film is seen as the best film ever done in Finland, and the 1985 version on the other hand, it's kind of the Voldemort of the Unknown Soldier filmatizations. Just don't mention its name.
Yeah, which I never really quite understood, because this may even also be kind of a more favorable version of the unknown for the Finnish defense forces and from their perspective, when defense forces are not seen as collaborators in some kind of a obvious propaganda, this runeberization, if you will, of the unknown and the history.
Yes and no. Yes and no. Um, I can understand, at least to a point, the kind of a reasoning behind this attitude. towards the 1985 film. There's a hell of a lot of things that you kind of have to understand about Finnish mentality and the Finnish mentality in relation to Winter War and the whole legacy of that war that Finland carries. If you are an international listener of the podcast and you are wondering what is the unknown and why the fuck are we talking about it, there's a hell of a lot of things that go into Edwin Lainer's film and the whole legacy of the war that it had for Finland. And for the largest part, I do think that that's perhaps the main reason why there's such of a shift in attitudes between these two films. I'm not necessarily saying that it's a good attitude to have, or that it's fair, or that it's right. But I can understand where that attitude perhaps comes from.
Yeah, it's quite ironic that the original novel is clearly very anti-war in its message and doesn't glorify the events. But then we have the 1955 version in which Väinö Linna wanted the Sibelius's Finlandia to be played in the background, to be used in the film as an ironic statement. But in the 1955 version, it's clearly something else.
It's the irony really doesn't come through. Like
Yeah.
It's patriotic to a fault. That's what Finlandia is in the original.
Yeah, it's funny. Like this book and the film were coming right about at the time when you would think that the Finns would like to kind of look back at the war and what is its legacy, and maybe this kind of a representation was bringing people solace. I understand it from the humor perspective. That I think it's nice, some of that humor coming off from the Edwin Laine version, as it's coming in the novel as well. But clearly, it could be also the producer DJ Särkkä's fault to an extent that it turned out to be this patriotic project.
I would say there's a lot of things perhaps going into that. Some of these were already addressed when we talked out Edwin Lainer's film last year. But in case that you haven't listened to the episode or you simply have forgotten, it's kind of a culmination of many things. There are several factors in play behind the film. One of them is that even though Väinö Linna's book, for the longest time, it has been regarded as one of the shining diamonds of Finnish literature, and even though it did sell extremely well, like it sold hot potatoes, when it came out originally, it still was bashed by the critics. The critical reaction to Linna's novel was hostile. It was downright hostile.
But it changed.
It's
The people in general started to shift it.
Yeah, it changed during the course of times, and of course, even back in the day when it came out, it sold very well. It was a hot seller in Finland, but there also you can see that the general attitude towards the book and what the book was saying was pretty damn condemning. The general attitude was that it's exactly the book that we don't need. That it tries to gather up shock value. Now all the soldiers they are just swearing and they are mean. Why is there? We don't need this type of depiction of a Finnish soldier. We need kind of the poster boy. And someone went even as far as to count all the curse words in the original book, to count them down and use them as an example of why the book fails. And it failed into a point where it at one time was even censored. So Väinö Linna faced heavy opposition when his book came out. And then there is the whole general attitude that, well, we Finns still carry about the war, which most likely also played factor in Edwin Laine's film. And also the fact that Edwin Laine himself never saw the war. He never took part in fighting. He was regarded as an artist, as someone who can actually, do propagandistic material, or otherwise help the home front, so to say. So he was given a free pass. He didn't have to go to the front during that time. So Edwin Laine himself had no first-hand experience what the war was about. His experience when making the film is an outsider's perspective, and it's also perhaps a perspective that also has to redeem something. Because back in the day, when the war was still going on, when Edwin Laine did not participate in the fighting, Edwin Laine himself was being taunted and bullied for the fact that he didn't go into the front line. There was the famous Finnish rhyme that doesn't really translate, but which went like lähtee mies, lähtee nainen, vaan ei lähde Edwin Laine.
Yeah.
So perhaps Edwin also felt that he really has to now do favors to the book, do favors to the veterans, to the men who fought in the war, in kind of some type of a attempt to redeem himself in the general in the eyes of the general public.
There was not only the opposition of the general public at first and the critics, there was also the opposition of the Defense Forces upper echelons for the 1955 version. The Defense Forces didn't much support this project. Actually, not at all, if I got my marbles correctly. And 2017 version, then this was actually, as the working title, Rokka, one of the characters of the film. And it was supposed to be centralized on the character of Rokka, but the plans changed. The film is clearly inspired by foreign films now for maybe the first time in such of a clear fashion in this saga, let's say. It reminds perhaps of the Thin Red Line. There is this sentimental, very aesthetic, maybe too aesthetic feel, technically very pretty, maybe too pretty, and meticulously lit, maybe losing some of that realism that we get into 1985. Why do you think, Henrik, it goes like this, that each version that comes out of it, they gonna deduce that the book is so holy that there is no artistic deviation allowed?
Well, that's a tough question, actually.
Yeah. If I can say something, it may be that we are trying to be too faithful to not make anyone feel bad about it, because the book is such of a respected and release that maybe it's kind of like if you would interpret the Bible and put it into a film. You don't want to change it too much. Let's say that Jesus didn't die on the cross, Jesus hopped off the cross and killed everybody with a bazooka. That kind of thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And actually, since you referenced unknown to the Bible, it's actually a good point, because when it comes to the filmatizations of the unknown, I kind of see the biblical film adaptation thing happening, where the source material really, there really isn't deviation. How the films tackle the source material in the name of scenes, like you mentioned, there is no Bible film where Jesus hops down from the cross, and neither is there a filmatization of the unknown where the major events within the story would somehow radically change. What there, however, is between both of these cases is a shift in tone and different type of artistic approach, tonally wise. In Bible films, you have, for example, Well, take Passion of the Christ, for example. You have the Willem Dafoe version from, was it 80s or early 90s when that was made, and then you have the Mel Gibson version, and they are tonally two very different things. They essentially try to tackle both the same thing, which is Jesus' crucifixion, but the first one is more of a general kind of more of a classical film, and then Mel Gibson's film is hour and a half of horrific torture and pain.
Yeah.
So same material, tonal difference. Same goes with The Unknown, where I would say that there is a major tonal difference, especially between Linus and Malberg's version. Line made kind of a adventure film that happens in the trenches. Malberg was making a war film.
Yeah, I would say that none of these versions of the Tuntematon have really gone a certain extra mile that would have been nice to see. Even the 2017 version, I think it should have been the one that would have pushed the extra mile to maybe go a little bit more interesting in challenging the authority by the end, which happens. But they don't like to go all the way, and maybe some of those territories that were charted but not completely. For example, how the women were treated, or what were their role in the war, would have been more interesting to really get down to it. And then you have scenes where one of the soldiers goes home. It's just kind of there, but it's not something that you couldn't cut away.
Yeah, that is true. At the same time, I do understand the adaptational problem that comes with The Unknown, because unknown soldier, the war, hell, Finnish military. It's almost it's kind of like the Finnish version of Holy Trinity.
Yeah,
Like Väinö book, it's almost like a religious text in Finland. And I don't know what to contrast the war itself against. But perhaps the Holy Ghost, grander than God Himself. So in that sense, I kind of can understand why it's so goddamn hard to actually really try to deviate from Väinö book when you are making a film adaptation, because you automatically you risk the essentially condemnation of the entire Finland. I mean, Yle made that extremely cheap Black Mannerheim film, and oh
mm-hmm.
boy, what resulted from that artistic experiment. It's still condemned in Finland even today. The Finnish press had a field day with that film. It's
Yeah,
essentially it's in the list of cursed movies in Finland, and all of it was one dude essentially. But everything in Finland, everything that ties down into that goddamn war, it's always so goddamn sacred. You
yeah,
if you take a look at the Winter War, or the continuation war that followed, and you even proposed a question like, was shooting Russian soldiers, was it a bad thing? Is killing during a wartime murder? If it's any other war, Finns automatically are like, yeah, enemy soldier, enemy combatant. He is a person. His life does have some merit. War is a gray area. Even in wartime, in a certain way, killing is murder, even if you are a soldier. But oh God help you if it's the Winter War. Everybody goes apeshit if you just propose the question.
well, if I may say so, we can get into this more in depth later, but if I may say so, at least the Finns have selected their target of pride in words to Winter War instead of the continuation war. So good choice there.
It is. We kind of want to lump the two wars together. Like
Oh boy.
we talk about the whole thing, the whole goddamn thing, but whenever we talk about it, we only talk about it in the context of the Winter War.
Yeah, this is something really interesting that was raised in some Yle interviews regarding Tuntematon sotilas movies. The veterans. Like, the veterans' feelings. Have we completely missed, or have we completely not thought about the veterans when we are talking about the wars, and in which kind of context, and how are we talking about the wars? Like, what kind of normal person who okay, this is super controversial. Let me
Yeah,
think
this
about
is
this.
we will get cancelled in Finland. Like I have to give up my citizenship following this line of thought.
Um, let's put some less ammunition into this thought. But all I'm saying, like, the general person who participated in the war as a soldier, what do you think is their feeling towards the war? And do they want the wars to be looked as something patriotic or something to cherish and think about and go back to every fucking Independence Day? Or is it more like, I had fucking shell shock level traumas, PTSD, during this time? It was the most horrific time of my entire life, and there is nothing sacred and great about killing other human beings. Can we just never, ever, ever talk about this war again?
Well, to be the one who finally burns this podcast background. Take note, Finns. Take note, Finns. After this, you can all attack us as most likely you will, or then we just don't have Finnish listeners. It's either two cases. We will get crucified on Facebook and most likely also in Finnish streets, or then we don't have Finnish listeners. This is truly the test for this podcast. But I have had a huge problem with the way how we kind of deal with the whole veteran situation. We have this habit of sanctifying the veterans in Finland. We are not the only ones who participate in this. This is also, for example, extremely American phenomena. I kind of believe that most of the countries that have gone through war, that have veterans, do this. But even with that in mind, I do think that Finland kind of takes the whole sanctifying aspect and runs an extra mile with it. Then it figures out that it really likes running, so it runs another mile. Then it hops on a train and goes 5 miles more just for the hell of it. And I kind of feel that in the end, I understand why it was done. And I understand why we have a tendency to do this. Like there is this attitude that we owe a debt of gratitude to the veterans. And I actually do agree with that notion. I do think that we do.
Sure.
I'm hell of a more happier to live in Finland than in modern day Russia. So when it comes to veterans, when it comes to my grandparents who also participated in war in some aspect, I am grateful for all of that. But I still think that we kind of are creating a massive blind spot with the way how we have to see the veterans in some kind of a holy light. And I think that we are doing a disservice here. The first thing that I think resulted from all of this is that for the longest time, the veterans haven't been able, or were not able, they're almost all dead now. But for the longest time, they were not able to talk about their feelings, their emotions, and their traumas that resulted from the war.
Yeah.
Because you kind of couldn't talk about it. And there was some really heavy shit that went down with those wartime experiences. That there were feelings of shame. Some had everlasting nightmares that resulted from the shame that they felt, since there was that one time when they were under a bombardment and they just couldn't muster up the courage to run from the trenches against the enemy fire. why the man next to him did it. There's this level of shame that goes on. There is a shell shock. There's PTSD. There's a godless amount of trauma that those men had to suffer. Yeah, and none of that really can be ever truly approached and dealt with, because if you have the godlike Finnish soldier, he cannot have any weaknesses. He has to be the ever smiling Antti Rokka, who gets wounded, but yeah, hey, no biggie. I may never walk again. Who knows where he gets shot? But it's all fun and laughs. It kind of robs also the veterans their chance to be human, to be three-dimensional, to be people who have strengths and weaknesses, who win and succeed and who also fail. The only thing that we have is a notion of a some kind of a super being who never wronged anyone, who never hurt anyone, and who when he killed in the war, it was not really a killing. He never shot a human being. He only shot at the enemy. When he came back home, if there was any domestic violence, if there was alcoholism, if there was anything that resulted from the war, well, that never happened. So you don't have a three-dimensional person. And the final disservice that basically happens to every generation following those men. Did you ever, Kari, did you ever fought in the Winter War? Be honest. I
No.
didn't. Yeah. So we can never be as good as the veterans were. Your dad can never be as good as the veterans were.
Mm-hmm.
You can do anything in your life. You can find a cure to goddamn cancer, but you will never be as good as the veterans were. And that basically is what now is the fate of every single Finn. Everybody who sings the praises and wants to keep up the holy image of the veterans has to also deal with the fact that whatever he or she does in the course of his life, none of it will ever merit to anything. None of it will ever truly matter in any significant way, because you will always be a lesser person when compared to the veterans.
A lesser man, essentially.
Yeah, it's kind of a emasculating experience when you really think about it. You can have a wife, you can have a child, you can have a bang up business, you can be a millionaire, but your dick will always be smaller when you compare it to the veterans.
Absolutely. Talking about the creator of the novel, writer of the novel, Väinö Linna, for a second, in case you missed the original episode about the 1955 film. He was born in 1920, was originally a lumberjack, but then started writing. Basically, this book, Tuntematon sotilas, is to some level about his experiences from the war. He participated in the continuation war from 1941 to 44 and fought on the Eastern Front as a squad leader. And so, essentially, The Unknown Soldier is his most known, a successful book that he ever did, but he's also very much inside Finland known for example, Here Underneath the North Star, which comprises of 3 books.
Yeah, and in a sense, The Unknown is a sequel to the Here Under the North Star, story-wise. Like in Unknown, you meet many of the same characters that you already met in the North Star, which takes place before The Unknown, like timeline-wise.
North Stars were released after Unknown Soldier, though.
It is. It was. But the story of the North Star,
Prequel.
yeah.
And if our listeners are still after 30 minutes or so confused about what the hell this movie is actually all about, okay, let's get to it. This is about the continuation war. And the continuation war is the lackluster sequel to the previous chapter of Winter War. So, Winter War was an aggression against Finland, which was perpetrated by the Soviet Union under this so-called casus belli operation, called shelling of Mainila, Mainilan laukaukset po finska, which Soviets attempted to frame as Finns attacking the USSR. And under this pretense, the USSR then started the war and tried to re-establish its influence in the entire Finland.
And there also goes the Russian listener base.
Goodbye.
Yeah, if this country gets invaded next week by Russia, you know who to blame.
Yeah, maybe we get hacked by Russia as a podcast. Yeah, but this Soviet stranglehold on Finland, this had been diminished because Finland got its independence in 1917 when Russia was a little bit busy with other stuff. And so they got the independence, but that wouldn't do for the USSR. So Finland lost some of its territory in the war of the Winter War, but maintained its independence. But of course, Finland had to agree to these unfavorable and frankly dangerous peace terms from the perspective of Finnish defense. And there was this Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact between the USSR and Nazi Germany, which made kind of the Finland's political influence and allies to be fewer and fewer. And Finland was kind of crushed between all of these big powers. And Germany had taken over Norway. The USSR had taken over the Baltics. And Finland couldn't even make a coalition with Sweden because both the Germany and the USSR disagreed on that. And so Finland's options were frankly quite limited here when it comes to securing the state from potential invasion for the foreseeable future. So Finland wanted their lost territory back, of course. There was this Greater Finland ideology building in people's heads, but Finland refused to be the one to start the war for the Nazis because Nazi Germany wanted to, advance into Russian territory anyway. But it seemed to be a-okay for Finland to start the hostilities from the Finnish side of the border, only the attack would have to be started by the Nazis, but from Finnish soil. And later Finns would join once the Soviets would have started their attack already. So this, of course, is essentially the same thing as Finland starting the war. Because Finland allowed the entrance and stationing and the refueling of Nazi troops by letting people enter, the Nazis enter from the northern Norway to Finland. And the Nazis then began the hostilities by bombing the Soviets in June 1941.
Yeah.
And Finland wanted to have its territory, as I said, and possibly additional Finnish-Ugri speaking regions, but they didn't want to advance to Leningrad like the Nazis had wished. And of course, the like of the Nazis had changed here, and Finns also successfully were also pushed back by the Russians now back to the post-Winter War borders. So Finland again needed to renegotiate a peace deal with the Soviets, and the terms obviously weren't favorable, this time either, but somehow Finland were allowed to keep their sovereignty. But of course, Finns had to also enter into this period of the so-called Finlandization. But that's another story for another episode.
Yeah, in many ways, Finland lost more in the continuation war than it ever did in the Winter War. When it comes to Finland joining the continuation war, well, this is once again something where the kind of a Finnish version of history deviates from perhaps from all the other versions there is, and this goes kind of with on the line with also the notion that Finland never lost anything, we just won.
Yeah.
And then we have to give up territory because that's what happens when you win a war. Losers games. It's a goddamn mess. But anyways, when it comes to continuation war, the general Finnish attitude is that Finland had no choice except take part in the war because we were in pact with the Nazi Germany, which we had to do in order to get troops and equipment
Yeah,
and
something to
training.
note perhaps that we never were officially in coalition or partners of the Nazi Germany, but well, de facto they were on our land and using our land and equipment. So essentially,
We
it was some
we
sort of a coalition, unwritten though.
yeah, we never signed a piece of paper.
Yeah, but as you can see, we were between two kind of big powers, and I would say that it was inevitable. We just, even if we wouldn't have had any kind of Greater Finland or Karjala takaisin mentality, Karelia back type of stuff, I think we still would have found ourselves in the continuation war situation.
Most likely, yeah. As in some way or the other, it's largely possible. But the second part that perhaps international listeners need to understand the Finnish line of thought here, it that the plan never was that the peasky little Finland attacks the enormous Soviet Russia and just wins it in the war. The line of thought here more was that since the Nazis will attack from a different direction, it will draw the the most or the heaviest Soviet attention, and also through this enormous Nazi attack, Russia will be kind of trapped between two frontiers, and the attitude was that Russia can't handle a true two frontier war. That two frontiers is too much for Russia, and that was kind of what drove Finland joining into the war, or at least gave Finland the impression that we really actually can stand some kind of a chance here, especially if we limit our attack to a certain certain reach, that we don't go exactly all the way and try to crush the entire Russia. But if we just advance enough, and the enormous Nazi war machine can kind of deal with the rest, then we can actually kind of win something out of this.
Yeah. If we move on to the director, Ronnie Mulberry, as you mentioned, he knew Väinö Linna personally very well, and they lived together in the city of Tampere and were in frequent contact. Jörn Danner and Matti Kassila, also these directors, they had plans for Tuntematon filmatization, but these never materialized. So Jörn Donner was planning to make this film, but Donner left the project. Matti Kassila was running the project forward in the 70s. Mulberry got involved with him, and later it became only the Mulberry project. And Mulberry won the Jussi Award for his Unknown Soldier. Jussi is kind of the Finnish equivalent of the Oscar. Väinö Linna, the writer, had to oppose leaving at least one character out of the 1955 film. But Mulberry was happy to add a lot of the characters that were left out. The film from 1985 has been also compared sometimes to, in its feel, to Come and See from Elem Klimov. I wouldn't go that far, but most certainly both are dark in tone.
I kind of can see the comparison, not directly, because there's like a huge difference between the two materials and also what they are actually trying to cover. But they both have this haunting quality in them.
Both are anti-war.
Both are extremely anti-war.
Yeah. So in casting, we had a lot of amateurs chosen to maybe better emphasize the youth of the film. It's like a valid choice because the the many people who joined the continuation were basically young adults. The preparation took about 2 years to location scout and find the right actors for the film. Something to point out is also that none of the actors are really introduced. I would say that this goes for all of the versions, but it really is like you can keep on guessing who these people are. And even to this day, I don't really pay attention to all the names in connection to the characters. So it just flies past me like, okay, here's one person, that's that person again.
You can take notice of the most famous of Finnish actors, those who most got the career following the 1985. Not necessarily even them. Like usually when I checked out when I watched it when I watched the film now, I did notice Pirkka-Pekka Petelius for the first 5 minutes that he was in the film
Playing Hietanen, yeah.
playing Hietanen, and after those 5 minutes, he simply became Hietanen.
Yeah, PPP. Many of these actors were sent around different parts of Finland to learn the dialect that they were supposed to have in the film. For example, PPP was sent to southwest Finland, Varsinais-Suomi, for dialect coaching or just, delving into that. And he, of course, has a long career in Finnish TV and films. Since he's such of a famous icon in Finland, I guess we can spend a moment on this. Known best for the Finnish audiences from the TV sketch shows such as Pultti Boys, which is seen nowadays as politically very incorrect in parts nowadays. And in 2019, he did publicly apologize for the depiction of the northern Same people. These were done, these sketches, in the 80s. He has also collaborated with Aki Kaurismäki, known for International People, for A Man Without a Past. And today does politics in the Green Party. But yeah, so this version of the film, I feel that the acting is oftentimes too wooden and too written. There is especially this young lieutenant character. This is going against kind of the original, where the dialects are still playing a big role. There are these few of these characters that have this very written language. It doesn't sound very natural to me. And as I stated out in our documentation when we were writing to each other, I could swear that this one character could be some inspiration for the Finnish TV show Pulkkinen.
He could be. I have to confess, I never got into Pulkkinen. I avoided that show like a goddamn plague.
Let me tell you that there's 10% that I feel that is golden, and the rest is really forgettable.
Okay. Well, in that case, I did exactly the right choice when I skipped it originally and never have never watched it. When it comes to the whole dialect thing with the film, you kind of are correct. I must give you that much. It is kind of wooden. It's kind of hard to listen to. It's kind of embarrassing at times, but then again, that's kind of how it just goes in Finnish films with Finnish language. Like Finland is Finnish is a language that I would say rarely, if ever, works in cinematic form. There's just something in our language that just kind of becomes extremely hokey.
The problem is that we're trying to use this more like neutral form of Finnish language, apparently so that different people from different parts of Finland would be pleased and would not feel maybe left out, or that this would be again the Helsinki dialect all over the film. That might throw some people out. That could entirely be the case. But it just makes it sound extremely unnatural. So because of this, I would just wish that people would use their own way of speaking in these movies, to just leave it at that. Unless you're trying to be, playing somebody who is from a different part of Finland, of course.
Yeah, I don't know. I really don't have a suggestion on how to fix the problem. But this is something that I too have noticed, and because of that, I can't really fault the film that harshly for the fact that the dialogue once again sounds wooden because doesn't it always?
To a degree, I would say that this has been already rectified in the new cinema of Finland in
It's
the 2000s, but it's still. For example, we have been watching some Finnish films this year. We watched
that there
There
will
Will
be
Be
spring.
Spring, and I thought that was quite natural performance.
It wasn't always.
Yeah.
I kind of noticed. Yeah, yeah, that's Finnish dialogue once again. Like to me the best example of this. I haven't seen the film myself, but I do have friends who went and saw the latest biopic of Tuve Jansson called Tuve, and my friends remarked that that was perhaps the first Finnish film for them where they didn't have to feel embarrassed by the dialogue. And far as I've understood, it's also a film that has been completely spoken in Swedish. So there you go.
Well, that works.
It works and it tells you something about Finnish language. Like if the only way a Finnish audience member can avoid embarrassment when watching a Finnish film is that everybody is talking Swedish, well, God help us, we are fucked beyond relief.
Of course, there are directors that use it as artistic depiction that they want these characters to speak written language and sound wooden, like Aki Kaurismäki loves to pull this off as a artistic scape. But I don't understand, for example, this film's motivation to do this, where we have characters who already speak well normally, and then there is one guy who is like, tänään lähetin kirjeen äidille. Taidan ruveta opiskelemaan. Tai something like that.
Yeah, something along the lines. Then again, for me, perhaps the easiest listening of Finnish dialogue I've ever faced is in the early Star Trek films that were made by a group of fucking amateurs in the some Asian region of
That
Tampere.
was sad. I
And
was
I'm not
I was traumatized by that film. Honestly,
I'm not talking about the latest of them.
I'm talking
In the
about the
beginning.
beginning.
Yeah, I'm not talking about that one.
Oh,
I'm talking about the earlier ones which got released free on the internet and which never were actually released in commercial form.
okay. And we already discussed that it seems that this book is so holy that the adaptations are kind of similar. I'm kind of pushing it, but in a way, it feels that the scenes are a copy paste from the Line version with this different tone. There is more to pull from the novel, but it's not utilized here, which is kind of weird. Like it seems that the main or the most of the scenes have been just pulled from the 1955 version. And interestingly, this is exactly what happens in the 2017 version.
Yeah, yeah. I I once again I'm not saying you're completely wrong. I do, but I do disagree with you a bit. I do feel that even though the general sentiment of your statement is factually correct, I do kind of feel that it's perhaps taking a bit too harsh of a reading and going too far with it. The main thing, the main difference between these, as already addressed, mostly is a tonal difference. Tonally, these are two extremely different films, and you certainly can kind of chalk this up that well, it's not new material. It's not really doing anything new with it, like scene wise. That much is true, but I do think that the tonal difference here is such of a is on such of a major scale that it kind of does make this a different film and these scenes into different scenes.
Yeah.
And then there are also some noticeable differences between the films. Also in terms of the material that you are being given. There are not necessarily like hell of a lot of new scenes. There are some new scenes, for example, and new characters in this film. Like already mentioned, the Lottas and the woman at the front, they actually finally exist. They are there for a short time, and for bit problematic reasons, yes. They mostly are just being kind of lost over by the high brass of the military. But at least now the characters are there. When the group reaches Petroskoi in this version, well, Petroskoi is more of a place, and they kind of do more in Petroskoi now. Now there is all that looting and drunkenness, things that were kind of alluded to in Edwin Liner's version, but it was just of a clean picture of it that you never actually saw any of it. You have that one scene with Babushka, and that's essentially all you get. And you can read that behind that scene there's all this stuff happening, but you are never shown like you are being shown in Mulberry's version. There's also with Petroskoi something that I feel is a major point of the film is the scene where the military pastor is purchasing stolen religious icons from one of the soldiers. And there's also the hint that he doesn't do it in the scene, but the way how the dialogue plays out, there is a extremely strong hint that later on he will also purchase prostitutes. And there's a lot of theme going on. Like in these small moments, there's a hell of a lot going on.
Was it in the 1955 version that they removed the what do you call them? The natsat, the marks of the soldier with a knife.
Yeah. That's in 85. Likewise is also the high brass. Once Finns at the very end of the film start to retreat from Russia and head back home, there are a couple of scenes where the military high brass now shows up and starts to demand extremely strongly that the army is to turn back and continue its offense and continue fighting, even to a point where they actually now start to execute the retreating soldiers.
Yeah, you said that the Line version would not address the Lost War, but the 1955 version does address it to an extent. There is, I believe, what is the final quote is something along the lines of, "Well, we lost, but Finland came as a good second." But of course, if you take the patriotic lenses on, you could see this as the soldier's sarcastic take on a hypothetical Soviet propaganda news, even. And I was always kind of torn. What is the meaning of this quote?
Yeah, and even without that quote, or even with that quote, that the kind of attitude at the end of the film is different, as already noted. And I think that really fuels into exactly how much Line addresses the point that we are retreating and the war is lost. In Malberg's version, that is being addressed a couple of times extremely clearly. And then you also have the enormous scene where they are evading, where they are leaving the battle and just starting to head home. You have all of this stuff going on in Malberg's film. In Edwin Liner's case, well, it's kind of mentioned once in a moment where the Finns retreating moment it's never actually said that now they are truly retreating. It's just they just continue the fighting on different locations, and the audience kind of, you as the audience, you kind of have to put one and one together and form the conclusion that no, they are actually retreating at this point. And also, since the film ends with the triumphant Finlandia playing in the background, and you have those last scenes of the soldiers standing in line, you have a lot of victorious patriotical imagery going on at the final, the closing shots of the film, which all kind of also helps to murky the story structure. The whole point that, well, actually the film, or actually the war was lost. You have, it's a situation where you have a film that showcases you that the war was lost while also playing triumphant music, and through images tries to say that no, we actually won.
Honestly, the fact that we were told the version that we were told in the primary school, at least when we were in the primary school, the vision, the understanding that was given to us as students was that Finland won the wars ultimately, which for I am actually really angry. This is very, very extremely misleading and basically partly total propaganda.
It it is, and once again, I can, in a way, I can understand why that sentiment exists. It's because the war is the holy beast, and anything that ties into the war is so sanctified within Finland. And but I do agree with you.
This is a
It's the,
version that is fed for young kids. Of course, they
yeah.
will be parroting it around, and then it's just some kind of like a Father Christmas realization that, oh, it wasn't like that actually.
It is, and then you have a whole bunch of adults who will get extremely violent if you even, try to question the official version of the historical record. And even the official version is kind of a mixed. It's really complicated. Like at this point, we have taken the brain gymnastic to a point where we can't even agree on how the war ended.
Hmm.
Like we like already mentioned in the previous time when we check out the war, we have like different versions how Finland won the war. It was a strategic loss where we lost but we won, or then it was some kind of a defensive victory.
Yeah, of course, what we won is to maintain our independence somehow. So we can be pretty happy for that.
Yeah, and that's not a small feat given the circumstances. Like I don't mean anything that I say in the way that the veterans didn't achieve anything, or that we shouldn't kind of feel, we shouldn't feel gratitude towards the veterans. I
Of
don't mean
course, we should.
anything like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, of course we should. But at the same time, historical facts are historical facts, and as the Americans really like to point to us, facts don't really care about your feelings.
Well, when it comes to this lack of certain changes in all of these three versions, I would still say that we could go with the gay version next time of
Nope,
Unknown Soldier.
nope,
No?
nope, no, most definitely no.
Like, this is kind of the alpha male story still, even though it's being critical of war, it's still something that is kind of, yeah, these are the ultimate Finns. And as you said, there will never be such alpha male Finns ever. So wouldn't it be the time to kind of break these societal norms and turn it upend the whole goddamn thing and have gays and have you know lesbian women on the field and fighting the Russians. Something like that we had in the Unknown Redux short film, which didn't have gays, but it could be funny.
First of all, I'm not the biggest fan of Unknown Redux.
Oh.
I thought it kind of missed a lot of points there. But if that kind of if gay version of the Unknown Soldier already exists, I can check it out. But that's as far as I will go. With all my trash talk about Finland and our relation to the war and the whole legacy of the veterans, and with all that, this is the moment where my conservatism is showing.
We finally found it.
This is way too heretical for even for me.
Yeah, and other problems that I have with the 1985 version is that it's still dehumanizing the Russians, which isn't entirely new to war films in any way, but it has this kind of mystical supernatural flavor in all of these films. They don't show the Russians ever in the similar situations as Finns. They rarely have faces, or they're rarely shown as having some kind of emotions on screen, doing the mundane things. It's this spooky faceless monster behind the bushes. And that is a slight problem.
Yeah, that it does. That it does. The film does do that, and I do agree that to a point it is a problem. How big of a problem? That, on the other hand, is its own separate question. You are of course correct. The film does never really depicts the enemy, and the few times when it does, there are like two of those moments. It depicts the enemy either as a critique of the Soviets, like there's that one time when they are trying to get to Petroskoi, when they face off some group, unnamed, really unfaced group of enemy combatants, and the Finns just comment that those men are starving, and
Yeah,
that's about it. Essentially, that's the moment in time is a condemnation of the Soviets. There is of course there's a truth behind that condemnation. The Soviet war machine was really a hell on earth, and a terrifying thing in many aspects, but essentially that's the only way how that group is being utilized. Later on, the only two other cases, you have that one soldier which gets executed by, was it Lehto,
yes.
who shoots the man in the back. That's now using the enemy combatant to demonize or show the falling of Lehto. And then you have that one dude who gets taken as a prisoner of war by Rocca, who then uses that dude, yeah, as a ace in his sleeve when he has to face the charges of dishonorable conduct within the army.
And
So
the character of Pirkka-Pekka Petelius telling to the rookie youngster soldier something. This is the quote, more or less, like, "What's it like to shoot a man?" And or is it Rocca? No,
it's Rocca.
it's Rocca. And Rocca goes, "I don't know. All I've shot were Ruskies. Aren't they human? No, they're
Mm-hmm.
not. Well, I don't know. Don't you start bothering your conscience. At least leave that until it's all over." End
Yeah,
quote.
yeah, and all of that is true. Like that's all the depiction you get for the enemy in the unknown, to a point that is a problem. Then again, the dehumanizing effect of the enemy is something that kind of is I would say it's a trope or cliche of the war movies. They fucking do this every single time. I would say every war movie does this. They never present you the enemy in any clear way, in any clear image. If they do present the enemy to you, then it's either in condemnation of the enemy, like here the starving competent scene, or then it's to show you the dark aspects of the quote-unquote heroes. Like, to give you a few examples, there's that Brad Pitt tank battle vehicle Fury. Doesn't show you enemy competence really at any point. It does show you enemy civilians, but those civilians then are being only used to kind of a more dehumanize the enemy competence. Platoon, another wartime classic. It never really shows you competence, shows you civilians, but mostly shows you civilians only to showcase you exactly how badly and how crudely the Americans treated the Viet Cong civilian population. To showcase you rape and sexual assault and unwarranted violence towards the civilians. So that's kind of the entire ballpark where you play when you are dealing with war movies. It's just something that you kind of have to accept, or then just not bother with war cinema.
Something that the Finnish audiences might not really pay that much attention to is the one that is not in the 55 version, but is here, is the drunken headquarters where one of the commanders goes, Heil Hitler! And as a Finn, as taken the situation that they are drunk and just knowing how Finns are, to me this is extremely ironic quote. But for somebody watching this with this narrator voice, for example, I saw that this film is not, of course, on YouTube with this Russian narrator voice on it, and just checking out those comments from the Russians below that video, it was like they weren't directly commenting on this particular quote, but I can see how these kind of misunderstandings can happen.
Yeah, and to explain the Heil Hitler thing to the international audiences, there's something that kind of you need to kind of remember with that particular scene. Couple of things. The first one is that once again, Finland and Germany were allies, and part of the Finnish troops, like the part of the higher ups, for example, they did get training from the Nazi side, so there was a cooperation, and with that cooperation, some of the ideas did get transported into Finland, and even if they didn't, there of course is this sentiment of gratitude towards the Nazi machine, because once again, those people were trained there. They got precious training from the German troops. The second kind of big thing here to remember, and that this is once again, this is tricky and complex, but it is. But even though as far as I've understood, that the Finnish military leadership, they did know about the anti-Semitic feelings that the Germans had at the time, but they didn't know about the whole Holocaust thing. So the Heil Hitler salute here, it's not in approval of the Holocaust. It comes from a character who didn't know, and exactly from a character, a fictional character, who didn't know about what was going on behind the Nazi curtain, didn't know about the camps, may have known about certain sentiments against the Jews, may have known about that the Jews are being seen as a lesser people, but didn't yet know exactly the extent where that viewpoint from the Nazis would actually carry.
Yeah, it's very important to for whatever it's worth for our listeners. But anyway, the Finland wanted to remain as non-partisan and independent and not make any coalitions officially, as they didn't with Nazi Germany. They just wanted at least most of Finns, including, I would say, in the leadership, were looking into taking back the territory that they lost in the Winter War and end it there. But I do feel that the way that this film is made, it kind of starts to lose whatever steam it has around the 3/4 mark. It's getting more choppy and quicker in succession and even maybe more random. There's events that are not related to each other as it's kind of the entire film, but very strongly like this. The soldiers get drunk, and around these moments, I'm starting to slightly tune out. This is a really, really long film. It's over 3 hours.
It is. It is. It is a long one. On my end, I didn't have that problem with Mulberry's version. In a certain way, I do kind of feel that this is perhaps more coherent than Linus was.
Yeah,
The main major thing for me with this sentiment is the fact that Mulberg makes the losing of the war part of the narrative more clear.
yeah. The Line version, of course, is there are a lot of problems there. At points, it's more serious. At points, it's funny, and at points, it's going almost to this kind of a rillumaré situation where it's starting to be so detached from reality that I don't know what to tell you.
It is, and in a way, but perhaps it's that change of tone that happens between these two films. But I also kind of found that I was thinking more what goes on in certain scenes in Malberg's version, even though the scene itself is very much the same. Like, to give you an example, there is this religious element that about the army that goes kinda in both films. The both films have the moment when the soldiers are still on the barracks and the war hasn't yet started. Like, they are about to embark to the war, but they haven't done it yet. It's those precious final few days that you have before you have to start the travel into the front. And in both versions, there is the priest character who makes a prayer to God, and all the soldiers are outside, in a line, following as this happens. And there was, like, in Malberg's version, I paid more attention into what the priest was saying, like like give us strength to even greater sacrifices, and begging that the same patriotism bless our whole nation and make it harmonious. And that's kinda that stick to me a hell of a lot more in Malberg. Because I don't know if this is somehow makes, at least for me, Malberg's take more coherent.
Yeah,
But somehow now I actually was more aware that holy shit, we have a priest who is praying that, give us strength to have even more people killed. And that's kind of a coolish.
it is. Speaking of killing people, there are other examples where the enemy is seen as having, well, rather ghoulish attacks as well. This evil and vile depiction of the enemy. We have the medic car attack, which is also in the 1955 version, where the Russians are killing all the people inside the medic car. And there's perhaps a couple of this situation, but this stuck to me. Is it fair? I don't know. Did they do that? I don't know. But something to think about it.
Yeah, yeah. It's hard to say because, oh, of course, well, surprise, surprise, bad shit happens in war.
Yeah.
I can very well believe that that type of attacks most likely did happen.
Yeah.
They kind of are part of warfare. Even though they are war crimes, but in wars, war crimes get committed all the goddamn time. Nobody, no nation's army who has gone through a war ever has clean hands on this regard. Not even Finns, even though no matter how much we would like to believe.
The way that the film ends is commendable tonally as well. There we hear the radio in the background explaining how it's saying something rather in a positive tone about the war. I forgot what it exactly was, but that now the war has ended, and in the screen we have this horse carriage loaded with bodies of Finnish soldiers. And the film ends as the last shot of those dead people on the carriage. And I remember getting quite emotional about seeing that for the first time many years ago. That works. That juxtapose.
It does, and it kind of finally gives you the unknown soldier in this film because those two buddies were never characters in the film. Unlike Lehto or Rokka, who most definitely are not unknown.
And now that you mentioned it, when I was a kid, maybe I said this in the previous episode, I'm not sure, but when I was a kid, I didn't know what the concept of unknown soldier kind of is. So I was watching these films and I was always looking for that moment when we would get to the point where the film would introduce a character that is some kind of unknown soldier. Maybe it's like a foreign agent invading the army, and then nobody knows suddenly who this guy is or is working in some way undercover. Or I was coming up with these theories, and then that never happened. I was quite confused.
Yeah, and in a way that the whole title, The Unknown Soldier, it kind of ties down thematically also, at least in my opinion, what is the main idea of the story. And this is once again something that I kind of felt a closer connection with more in Molberg's version than in Linus' case, which is that it essentially it kind of is a faceless mass fighting for the few in elite. Like this is I talked about Platoon before, or name dropped Platoon before, and the reason why that film came so clear to my mind when I was watching Molberg's take is that I felt that both films essentially dealt with the same topic, which is that the poor man has to fight the rich man's wars. In here, the war where these young men are being sent to, it's kind of a Molberg paints it out as a self-serving war. That there's kind of that remark or that attitude from the high brass of the military that we lost the Winter War and that war was an embarrassment. So now there is there is this honor that we have to reclaim, and there's kind of a vengefulness towards the Russians in their desire to have the war. Like they remark that this time we have to destroy the Ruskies for once and for all, and that we
Mm.
have to quote unquote go all the way. And someone even makes the remark that if you are in the military hierarchy as some kind of a lieutenant or you know other member of the press, you can actually gain a promotion if you have a war. That's one nasty side of the war. For a soldier, war is a great place to earn promotions. You can get them pretty easily. But the ones who that most serve, of course, are the leadership, the higher ups, those who don't have to go to the front line. They can earn their promotions while somebody else does all that dirty ass fighting business and also risk life and limb. And this is something that kinda is also the main point of the Platoon from Oliver Stone, that wars are being fought by those who generally are invisible or faceless or unknown to the society. In here, it's being fought by farmers and factory workers. It's being fought by the poor. It's being fought by students. It's basically those who you come across in everyday life and never pay any attention to are the ones who in a wartime they are the ones who are asked to sacrifice the most.
Yeah.
It's the lesser aspects of our everyday society that during a wartime sacrifice most of themselves, and the ones who reap the benefits are those who can be in safe and sound from the front line. It can be it is the military pastors who can purchase stolen icons for their own personal collections in dirt cheap, like with some flour and sugar, which means a life to the men who are doing the fighting, but to the man doing the purchasing, it's fucking nothing. It's technically free. It's military rations that you are giving to them. So those are the ones who reap the benefits.
Did they bomb a horse to death in this film? It really looked way too realistic, I'm afraid.
I tried to look it up and I never found a confirmation in any way what happened to the horse. It's
Yeah.
as far as I can tell, it's done on one take,
Mm-hmm.
which is precisely the reason why it feels so uncomfortably real.
There's the one soldier on the right side, but it seems that there were no tricks involved in this shot. And besides, it's kind of handheld the most of the film, so that kind of limits your options in trick shots as well.
It does, and since you mentioned that one soldier, something to take note is that he's on the right side of the horse, and the explosion comes from the left side of the horse.
Mm-hmm.
So in case that they actually did use a live explosive in that moment, the soldier, the actor playing the soldier can take relative refuge from the notion that the horse is going to take most of the blast.
Indeed. Well, could be noted as well that there might be some more horse killing action in another version. There's the TV version of this film, which I haven't seen, which I haven't been able to look up since it's also not available in the Yle archives. And that version is 220 minutes, if I remember correctly, versus the normal version, which is 180 something. So yeah, please tell us if you find it.
Yeah, I also would be really tempted to see the full version.
What was your favorite performance, Henrik?
In my case, that would have to go to, I guess, to Pirkka-Pekka Petelius.
Yeah.
I don't have any fancy reasoning behind my pick. It's like I do think that all the performances are really strong here, and I don't have like that typical that problem that you often face with what essentially are remakes, that the Rock in the original was so much better and the new one sucks ass. Nothing like that.
Yeah.
I enjoyed all of the performances. So, but somehow, for some reason, when I think about the film, Pirkka-Pekka Petelius is the one who
Yeah,
first comes to my mind.
that is true. For me, it's a shot in the kind of starting points of the film when they are told that they need to relocate, and then they're walking on between some fields on some country road, and that's kind of rememberable when they're talking about the vagina in that scene. But personally, I don't really know. I guess I could be kind of controversial tonight, but I did really like this "Niet poni my Russian" that Lehto shoots from behind. You could see the terror in those eyes. And at least it was finally an actual person who seemed to be speaking native Russian, which wasn't exactly the case in the 55.
No, and it's not the case in 85 either. The one moment when you get the one another moment where you actually get some dialogue from the enemy combatants. It turns out that it technically is a Russian Finn, and he speaks
Oh,
in Finnish.
so this that Lehto executed, or
No,
what?
it's the starving guy
Ah,
who tells them that yeah, they really haven't had anything to eat.
yeah.
So yeah, the one dude who left us shoots in the back is the only Russian combatant that actually says a word in Russia.
Yeah, I'm sure the filming crew weren't exactly thinking it in the ways of let's cross the eastern border. Let's scout for some actors in St. Petersburg and introduce this film and what it's all about. Like, would you like to play this character who gets a bullet in the head from behind?
No, and you also would have to then deal with the whole subtitling thing. If you would have given them any lines that would have had like a noticeable plot meaning.
Yeah. Well, favorite quote.
Well, on my end, on my end, and it has to be, it has to be this quote. There's just no other options.
Tässä ei ole sellainen.
Hey,
Not this year.
not this year. It once again it goes to Pirkka-Pekka Petelius. It goes to Urho Hietanen when they are talking about cigarettes, and Hietanen remarks that tastes like a fag, sir. Fag tastes like a fag. That's something that you really can't say these days anymore. You have to address them as homosexuals and be more politically correct about it.
Well, I suppose that word was more popular back in the day, yeah.
Essentially, it's a translation from the Finnish word kessu, which means cigarette.
Yeah. Well, I would go with this when these two guys enter the story and enter the leadership tent. Unfortunately, as Unknown Soldier has never been like extremely close to my heart, I have to say, I guess I just am unable to remember these names of the characters, but it goes like this. Jahas, te olette alikersantti. No niinhän minä oon. Talvisodassa antoivat natsat, syytä en tiedä. Pahaa, kun en oo kenellekään tehnyt. And roughly it translates to, all right, you're a sergeant. Yes, I am. They gave me my stripes in the Winter War. I don't know what for. I never caused anyone any harm.
Yeah, this is actually a surprisingly quotable movie. There's a lot of great lines. To a point where actually picking your one favorite gets tricky. I also love the line. I don't remember what was it. Was it Lahtne? Yeah, it was. It was Lahtne who remarks that it's not a question of petrol shortage when the press drives around with their horse.
I also like the scene where one of the soldiers is saying to Pirkka-Pekka Petelius's character that, well, how would there be room for something to go wrong in your head? Something like that. And they laugh at the joke. And this joke and this quote that I just uttered, I think it doesn't translate too well into English, and I'm not sure if they are even intelligible in the subtitles.
The subtitles are professionally made for commercial use, and I think that they are pretty fucking horrible. To be completely honest, like there's so much that they get wrong, And that kind of goes to show you that Finnish language is kind of a nightmare to translate.
Yeah, that and yeah, I just don't think that really works in English, even if you tried.
No, no. There's something that you completely lose in translation.
Three adjectives to describe Tuntematon.
To me, it's real, it's haunting, and it's pacifistic.
Yeah, realistic and tonally flat and a bit overlong, I would have to say. But then it's the question of would you recommend the film, Henrik?
I, on my end, absolutely would. I I guess it's already completely clear. I don't have half of the problems you have with the film, even though I do acknowledge the shortcomings that you raised up here today. I still I don't feel them at the same level as you do,
Hmm?
and I'm not saying it's better than Linus version. I think that the two films, they are so completely different beasts that I even refuse to say or answer the question which one of these two takes is better. But I think that Malberg's version is one of the greats of Finnish filmmaking. It does have faults. It does have shortcomings. There's a lot of little things that you can point out and say that's something that the film fucks up. But I think that tonally, it's such of a heavy film, and there's a tonal clarity, in my opinion, to Malberg's film, that I do think that this is a worthy adaptation of Linna's novel. And I also feel, since you mentioned the handheld camera here,
Yeah, shaky cam before shaky cam was a thing.
yeah, and I think that this is one of the few this is one of the films that has best shaky cam. Not necessary in a way how it technically works. Like this is not your Paul Greengrass feature, but in a way how it actually achieves that documentary effect. Like
And
this is a
yeah,
this is a fictional film that really at times, honest to God, feels like a documentary. And something
yeah,
that feeds into it is that it does use the documentaristic film language. It takes those quiet close-ups into individual little details that tell you so much, like a hand, groping someone's ass, or a zoom into someone's face. It does those. It does utilize both the dramatic fictional language of the film and film language of the documentaries. And even though, yeah, you always remember, you always know that this is a fictional film. It's based on Vanelina's book. You never actually, you don't get tricked. You don't believe you are watching a documentary. But for one, I did feel at times that I was watching a documentary. And I think that really is something, like I don't exactly know how Malberg was able to create such of a strong effect, but that is one hell of an effect. So on my end, yeah, a wholehearted recommendation for the 1985 film. It has been crucified and villainized and demonized in the public Finnish discourse, and I think a goddamn crime has happened. In the way how Malberg's film has been treated. So please, by all regards, check it out. Seriously, check out 1895 version. If nothing else, just wait for the Independence Day, and instead of watching the Edwin Linus film for the 50th fucking time, you know, I
mm,
don't know, rent it somewhere for dirt cheap and just see it.
Yeah, coming back to the shaky cam, there are some people who are actually complaining about the shaky cam, and I would say literally or clearly the only place where you get proper shaky cam is the swamp crossing. And even that, I think it feels good, and you kind of are thinking of yourself in the army. No, I'm not going to rant about my army experiences for 5,000 hours, but you can remember when you're running across some places and you feel the pulse racing and you hear the gunshots, and there is this chaotic visuals that you get during that, and I think it's great. I have heard that the director Molle is a bit of an authoritarian and very demanding figure who might get slightly carried away perhaps in what he's trying to accomplish and making it feel too artistic. I don't know about that. I will not crucify this film tonight. It takes a realistic approach, but I feel that it might sometimes lose some of that cinematicness because of it. Because the goal is to be kind of flat tonally on purpose, and I think it's a noble and great idea to show the war like this, as it could have really been, without sugarcoating it. Kind of making it, well, flat or in a way boring, as it should be. But then it takes it even, and even though the film has color, the story kind of lacks color in a way. It's monotonous, it is, and the separate scenes don't really provide any cohesive narrative, which I think is the curse and the blessing of all the versions stemming back from the novel, of course. But I'm not sure if the film has to be this flat on screen, lacking almost all of the humor. There are some points where it has humor, but the book had maybe a certain emphasis on the humor. Granted, maybe the most parts of the humor that you get is in the first 10 pages or so. But maybe I'm asking too much from a 1985 version, but it's not very brave to use all that anti war material in that book. And the 2017 version fares at least slightly better, but still not quite there. I recommend this film and all of the versions, in fact, as I have said, and all the versions they have their own unique flaws. But maybe on this rewatch, this entry might be the least impressive of the three, if you will. Then again, these are quite different beasts altogether, but I do like the film. I do like the film. It's hard to choose between them.
It is. It's almost impossible, and I like I said, I refuse to do that today. I'm not even gonna try
Yeah.
because the tones, as mentioned 5 million times already, the tones are so completely different between the two, between the films, especially between Mulberry and Line. Like, as mentioned already, Line, in my opinion, was making an adventure film, and Mulberg is
Mm-hmm.
making a war movie. And because of that, have they have their individual identities, and you kind of can't fault the film for that. You can't take two completely different identities and say that. At least in my opinion, you can't clearly take two completely different identities and just say that, well, this identity is better than this one, and you can't compare them back to back. And this is perhaps where, well, when we eventually next year we're gonna reach once again the unknown soldier, and it's gonna be Aku Louhimiehes version of the material. I think that this might be the biggest question that we have to face next year.
Yeah.
Which version in the end perhaps takes the cake the most, and also, since we have been kind of on safe waters, both films, Line and Mulberry, they both have had their identities have been on opposite sides. Agulohimies is bound to land somewhere between the two, since extremities have now been covered. So it asks. So the second big question that we have to ask next year from ourselves is, what is the identity of Lohimius version? Is it war film? Is it an upgrade from Malberg, or does it find its own special place between these two films?
I would say that it's still trying to be a bit too careful for its own good, but like stated, all of them bring something. The first one is forgiving a lot of things because it was the first one, and it has automatically this nostalgic feeling because it's black and white and it's really old film, and it's made 10 years after the war. So, and also this many of the actors were in the actual in the actual war, so maybe that channels certain realisticity in parts there, certain mood anyway. But it's kind of this adventure, not realistic film. Then you have this realistic film in the middle, 2017 version, if you would like to simplify. Once again, it's this kind of a foreign inspired film with the slow motions and what do you call this effect when people start to get deaf for a moment. It's playing with that kind of a cinematic modern language. It's a very pretty film. It's trying to appease, of course, also the international audiences. But as stated by many, this is still a kind of a niche part of kind of the Second World War. As in, I don't know how many people are really willing to see this outside of Finland.
Most
And
likely nobody.
yeah, and as I understand it, there is some a bit different structuring in the beginning of the film to make it kind of more obvious or more clear to the foreign audiences in the foreign markets of the version that what the hell is going on in this film.
Yeah, I do still maintain, with with all the criticism laid out at Line here today. I'm not faulting any version of the unknown, and I do think that every version does have a kind of a mission statement. They all have a reason to exist, and they all have a purpose. And especially since well, line has been brought up in the discussion today quite a lot, and also in critical light. And we have made the remarks that line made the film knowingly unrealistic, and it's not really a war film. I still do side with Edwin Line in his artistic decisions when it comes to 55 version. I do think that back in the day when that film was done, it may have been the film that that Finland and the Finnish veterans needed at the end of
Yeah,
the day.
maybe
Yeah,
it served a purpose, and all of these films are very much, as I've stated, a product of their times. So it's interesting watch in also that sense.
yeah. But that was a hell of a mellow discussion to be had. Uh,
Was it?
it kind of was. Like I don't know how it sounds in the final audio, but goddamn, did it feel like we are in a grave here?
Okay. Uh, yeah.
I
Hmm.
guess I guess we haven't been this serious since Apocalypse Now, which was
Whoa.
good. Also, like I feel kind of bad just existing. Case of the episodes.
Yeah, uh, well, generally, I'm not worried about any of the content of this podcast anymore. It seems that we can talk about female rape, we can talk about horrific war crimes in Serbia or Bosnia, we can talk about fucking anything here, but nobody will bat an eye. So
Yeah,
we have been in such of a territory here that if a Finn would listen to it with a very patriotic heart, then well, we could get some listeners. Let's put it that way.
yeah. I don't know. Maybe we have to like denounce God in the next episode. Maybe that would give us some ears.
What's gonna be the tagline headline for this episode? I don't even know.
We'll figure it out. But yes, somehow, for some reason, talking about the 1985 version. Now speaking as a podcast host, it was kind of a harder
Yeah,
and more draining experience than talking about Edwin Line's film.
yeah. Somehow we didn't go to these waters back then, but I guess that's fitting with the 85
Yeah,
now.
I don't know. Had we grown up as persons,
I doubt it.
or is it thanks to Mulberry? But somehow today it felt heavier.
I think we have still grown during this podcast. I would certainly hope so. And I think even though you especially have delved into so many directions of cinema before we even started this goddamn podcast, I think that both of us have still, even though we have studied also these subjects to an extent, I still think that this has given us a lot of new ways to look at cinema, and I think we have still learned a hell of a lot doing this.
We have, and surprisingly, yeah, doing a film podcast is an experience where you actually have to learn constantly quite a lot.
Yeah. All right, so, and as some of our listeners might not yet have heard about it, we are going to change the format in the near future of this podcast a bit. We have had some listener feedback that apparently there could be some other ways to do a film podcast. I don't know.
Yeah, or cease doing film podcast altogether.
Yeah,
But rest assured, we have paid attention to your feedback.
and we have paid attention to our own well being. And since we have done this format this way already for more or less the entire run since the beginning, this 120 something episode, and
Over 2 years.
yeah, we were just thinking that, since we are doing this also with such of a pace and with the same format, that we could kind of mix it up a little bit.
Yeah, even the Flick Lab is kind of getting tired of the Flick Lab.
So, starting next year, we will start to cover more films in one singular episode, but it's going to be a more like a more broad look at, for example, a particular franchise or particular kinds of films, particular period of films, particular country and its films. So, we would like to discuss, for example, the Jurassic Parks in one singular episodes, the sequels. We could talk about Hellraiser 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 in one episode because we don't want to make 6 episodes of all of them separately because we don't want to kill ourselves with boredom and our listeners.
Yep. They're just there are like films that are interesting to talk about, but where you don't get enough material for an entire episode. There are films that are interesting to talk about in juxtaposed to the franchise itself or as a part of a long running franchise. But once again, who as individual film is not something that you really want to think about that much.
And as some of our listeners might have noticed already, we have started to take away the scene by scene part of our podcast and replace it with more of like a general discussion analysis around the film and why it became what it came and that kind of thing. So we have kind of given it up because frankly we want to do something else. So this is kind of the first effect that you have already seen.
Yeah, there has been quite a lot of subtle changes in the podcast as time has gone by.
Yeah.
Like when we started, we were really nitpicky. Then we became less about individual moments and more about general themes. Then we became more kind of a deep in thought. Perhaps more, the correct word would be more meditative in
Mm.
our discussion. And now we have, lost scene by scene. And next year, yeah, it will be more drastic changes will happen.
And the episodes will start to come up every second week, bi weekly, as this kind of episode need more of our time. And frankly, we want to spend our time a little bit differently outside of the lab. So that will change. And who knows what we will do with the actual time limits or if there will be any time limit. I would say that probably it's so case by case in such episodes that we're going to do that it could be better to not think about any time limits. But this is still kind of up in the air, I guess.
Yeah, there's still a lot of question marks hanging in the air, even for us. And a lot of things that I guess we kind of have to figure out as we do it with the once again with the new format.
As usual, we're taking our listeners as hostage on the ride of test runs. But hey, Henrik, hyvää itsenäisyyspäivä, happy Independence Day once again.
Hyvää itsenäisyyspäivää.
At this point, for this week, would it be time to give our lab coats to the Finnish army to use as snow camouflage?
Oh, I guess so, because since it's the Independence Day is coming, I guess I have to go to Gander shopping so that I can spend the Independence Day itself entirely at the graves, as you do in Finland.
Well, something more a little bit happily toned, I hope, next week. What is our next week's film? I suppose I'm asking you this question every time, even though you don't know the answer, do you? Well, we'll be plotting with Ali Pitts from Russia Files Unite film podcast that he would do a guest appearance next week with us. And the film that he suggested for us to watch is once again an L.M. Klimov feature, but he was almost rather insisting that we should really also cover this one, even with the full knowledge that we have already covered one film from this director, Come and See, before. So this film would be Welcome, No Trespassing. Are you up to it?
Seeing how we are gonna hopefully have a guest in that episode, I guess I have to. Like, this is the moment where the guest is holding me as a hostage.
Yeah, this is a comedy from Russia, so changing gears. This will be the second last of our podcast done with this traditional format. And then we will take a Christmas and New Year's break after these two still upcoming episodes. But for now, make no mistake, see you next week.
Until then.
Niin sä oot laittanut mun Tuntematon sotilas DVD. Se oli tässä aamulla. Minun Tuntematon sotilas DVD. Oot vienyt. Siellä kotonas pidät jotain leffailtoja salaa naisten pikkupyykkiä peseskelet. Niin, rotta. Joskus olo voi olla meillä kaikilla, kun rokalla tuntemattomasta sotilaasta. Mutta nyt pistetään Elvistä äässön siitä. Kato Sauli, terve. Mitä Carl Gustav Emil Mannerheim?